if you can't take my blood while I'm alive, then why are you going to take my organs when I'm dead? At the end of the day, they're still covered in blood, and they're still, I'm still a gay guy who died. And you're still going to test everything anyway, and you say that so it just really infuriates me, and I actually took my name off the organ donor list.
Probably twice in my life. Now this was earlier on, kind of a few years ago back, when I hadn't yet come out. So at that time I was still eligible to donate the blood, and then after that I stopped. And I still get emails to donate, but I haven't updated them on my status. So.
Canadian Blood Services in 1998 was given responsibility for the blood system in Canada. As part of that, they include a donor questionnaire.
Just recently, when I started having a relationship with a man, then I went to donate blood, and that was not possible, and they said I wouldn't be able to donate because I was a part of that category of folks who can't donate or who are banned from donating blood for HIV and hepatitis C and all the other sort of bloodborne infections.
It doesn't make a lot of sense that there's a whole kind of group of people that aren't allowed to donate, especially when there's such a shortage of blood for people that have been in accidents. So, I understand how it came about and the policies that were implemented at the time because of, the state of science and the testing that they were able to do. But a lot of things have changed now to the point where I think it's time they need to revise those things.
There's this overall understanding that men who have sex with men have sex orally and rectally. So your throat has a lot of blood vessels, right? More blood vessels means higher absorption rate. So imagine this, you have a male that is HIV positive and is transmitted through blood and bodily fluids, right, in general. Like, it goes inside the rectum, where there's a lot of blood vessels, where it's gonna be absorbed a lot more. The possibility that you absorb the virus is so much more than if a woman who is HIV positive, where her vagina is really perfused, meaning like there's a lot of blood vessels, and a man goes inside who is HIV negative, there's not a lot of blood vessels on the skin of the penis. The blood vessels on the penis are inside the penis. So the absorption rate on the penis is less than a woman's vagina, the throat, and the rectum.
I don't have hepatitis C and I don't have HIV, and there's a lot of people like me in the community. I'm a guy who has sex with guys. I get tested regularly and, once a year, along with my entire blood work that I do when I go to get my physical. I'm cautious about my condom use. We get, bombarded with information around safer sex practices, etc.
I don't think anyone that's HIV positive is gonna go into the clinic and I want to donate my blood, because they know what they have. They know the dangers of it. They know the dangers of it in their own body and to everyone else around them.
So if you actually look statistically at where the new cases of HIV are occurring, they still are occurring disproportionately in the gay community.
So there's not actually a difference in the risk associated with the tissue?
That's right. It's the risk that the patient is going to die without the stem cells or the organ, compared to blood, where there's a lot of blood out there, so we know that the patient isn't going to not get a transfusion.
And how do you reconcile that with instances where an emergency happens and you need a lot of blood really quickly, and still MSM are not allowed to donate in that instance?
So we have never, knock on wood quickly, but we have never seen in this country a time where we had an emergency and there was more blood demanded than we could provide. So it partly is an expression of our horror as members of our society in seeing really terrible things happen and wanting to go out and help and do something about it. And one of the things that we often first think about is, I'm going to go donate blood. In the actual reality for those patients, there wasn't a shortage of blood. There's enough blood in the system to be able to move that.
They changed it with the former health minister from a life ban to 5 years, so you cannot have had sex for 5 years, and then just recently they switched it down to 1 year. So there is that ongoing conversation that's happening, but the policies again are so the agency is slow to move.
The new Trudeau government, it came out of medical doctors, science communities. Working with largely white gay communities to provide the evidence that demonstrated that there was no need to expect gay men not to be in relationships with each other.
You were not being inclusive, no.
Okay.
And like in our, I feel like in the nursing curriculum, it's very glazed. Like it's not as specific. We always talk about like how these individuals are marginalized, but we're not taught how to address all these.
So we start to see how anti-Black racism in blood donation is a thread from the first public clinic in 1940 to the ways in which HIV/O are overdetermined to be part of Africa, 8 specific countries in all of Africa, even though there's indications that HIV/O exists outside of Africa, but those questions aren't named. And then we see the way that it's operationalized, like the donor clinics, where we have clinic workers saying to white people, this question wasn't about you. In 2015, Canadian Blood Services changed the question to read Togo and Cameroon. They also shifted the timelines a little bit. And and I asked them why are these questions remaining, Canadian Blood Services argues we need to account for if there are any new strains of HIV so that we have time to develop a test. And so even in their framing, there was a belief that if there are new strains of HIV, that these new strains will only come out of Africa. They have these really interesting images that they use with the donor questionnaire. For Africa, when they ask, have you had sexual contact with anybody from Africa, there's this image of the acacia tree. What that tree has to do with sexual contact is beyond me. And if we look at where HIV/O exists, right? Because this, again, the argument that they were using in the 8 specific countries in Africa, the acacia tree is not indigenous to those countries. Another image is that of an elephant. And the question is, have you received blood products in Africa? And then they show a picture of an elephant. And when you ask them, what does the elephant have to do with blood donation? They're like, well, we wanted to use images that would remind people of home. And I was like, well, there's houses in Africa, and there's buildings, and there's cities, and there's technology, and there's people. So why have you not used images of people? And there was no answer around that. And so often, and quite frankly, when I spoke to Canadian Blood Services and identified all of the ways in which this work perpetuates anti-Black racism and that they themselves are engaging in anti-Black racism, they laughed. And so the fact that they would laugh at that also speaks to the ways in which they do not consider Black people's concerns seriously or even with respect.
There should be like a mandatory teaching for continuing education for all nurses, for all types of clients, like LGBTQ, indigenous, homeless, individuals experiencing homelessness. They should have a thorough understanding of what it is like to be that and what is the care needed for that, rather than having this vague guidelines as to how you should treat them. I feel like there should be specifics, this population has a higher risk of this, so make sure that you do thus and thus.
It's great to change the policy, but there needs to be training in terms of how you assess behavior and how you determine whether that person is safe to donate blood or not. So, it goes back to what society is like. So we may have inclusive laws in place and inclusive policies in place. However, how it's practiced on the ground is not the same. If the laws actually have impacted on society, then we would have no racism, we would have no homophobia, we would not have classism. But the way society still handles situations is the same. So those biases may come up in those intake folks who are doing the screening.
It's not surprising to me when I hear about nurses and clinic workers say, we really only think of Black people as beasts. We really think of gay people as immoral, as sick, as pedophiles, right? They continue these homophobic and racist interpretations of people. So how do you train for that? Can you train people? Can you educate people out of their racism? Can you educate people out of their homophobia?
Education is not the only answer. Like, you have to be self-aware. You know, why do I feel this way? Like, what can I do to not feel this way or just keep feeling this way? Like, if they're positive thoughts, like if a client makes a comment and you think it's funny and you're enjoying it, then that's good. But if you're if they say something and then you just think of really discriminating thoughts, anything that might put down some other person, we all have these. I'll admit I have them as well. But I feel like you have to accept that you have these thoughts. You can't just avoid them and pretend that you're on the top, because there's this power structure between you and your client. So you have to know that you have these thoughts, because their care is going to rely on how you treat them.
You need to see the employee training manual that governs the practices of clinic workers, because we want to assess how they're being trained and what information they're giving that they can actually say to white people, this question isn't about you. And 3 years later, they've refused to give us that information.
So what is your opinion on nurses who reject donors?
They need to get fired. I'm joking, but they need to set aside their biases and actually do their job well. They have to address and reflect on what is wrong about what they're doing, because as nurses, we're always taught to provide care that is non-discriminatory and always provide care that is equal and caring, just in general.
Blood has always been really central in politics, in social settings, in law, in health, in identity, in race. And so when these conversations around blood donation and gay blood and deferring men who have sex with men, I was immediately interested in the ways in which, once again, the presence of anti-Black racism was being ignored purposefully. I would say it was done on purpose, yeah.
There's a bit of a fear there. However, if they're going to let the fear move them, then they're again shooting themselves in their foot, because they desperately need blood donation. And I would love to donate blood. The minute that they say, you know what, Haran, you can donate blood, or anyone can from the MSM LGBT community can donate blood, I'd be showing up with my donor card, and I'd re-sign the organ donors, because I've had lots of friends who needed blood transfusions. I know people who need blood transfusions. I know people who need organ donations, and you have someone who's perfectly healthy according to the doctor, and there's many more folks like me who want to do that, but they can't, and that's a sad state of affairs for Canada as a country to even examine.